Welcome this morning. This session is on Actuary versus Apple. Please, during the session, if you've got some questions and answers, can you go to the Q&A icon on the Summit HQ app? The link to download the app can be found through your name tab. For our virtual attendees, you should already have the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen. The speakers today, first of all, I have Matt Noyce from MNC Actuaries. Matt is the founder and owner of MNC Actuaries, a firm of 20 actuaries and data scientists and a trusted partner for insurers, reinsurers, and superannuation funds. Matt has 30 years' experience in life insurance, reinsurance, superannuation, and consulting across Australia, New Zealand, Asia, and the UK. His previous leadership roles include Chief Pricing Actuary for Swiss Re and a member of the Australian leadership team. Prior to that, he was Chief Pricing Officer for CommonSure and responsible for the pricing of its life and general insurance products. MNC client engagements include strategy, operations, and data analytics, in addition to many traditional and actuarial projects. With Matt is Bob Rick-Louis. Bob Rick-Louis is a data scientist at MNC Actuaries. He has developed extensive data science experience over the last 5 years, helping life insurance actuaries to build and maintain complex pipelines for data validation, financial modeling, and insights analysis. He is experienced at the implementation of R models in building pricing pipelines for insurance in superannuation. He has an entrepreneurial nature and a unique background from previously being a trader for a proprietary cryptocurrency trading firm and working for a government market research firm. Chenny is a data science actuary at MNC Actuaries. Chenny has more than 10 years post-qualification experience in the Australian and UK life insurance markets. Before joining MNC 3 years ago, he spent 4 years working in an insurtech robo-advice as head of protection advice at Anorak Technologies in London. Chenny also worked for TAL for 4 years as a data analytics actuary and group pricing actuary, including pricing large, successful insurance tenders for superannuation funds. Chenny is a daily and expert user of R and Python, but is also a user of SQL, BigQuery, and SAS, and has developed many of MNC's insurance and superannuation dashboards. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Matt to start.
Well, thank you, Robert. And thank you, everyone, for coming this morning, this afternoon. There's a lot of competition at the moment on sessions, and it's great to see everybody here, so thank you for coming. So Apple versus Actuary. Could I just check, before we start, how many of you have been for a jog or a walk or a run or a swim or gone to the gym since arriving in the Gold Coast? Anyone been and done a little bit of exercise? Great. A few hands going up, excellent. And how many of you use some kind of wearable device yep, quite a few people. So look, these things are becoming part of our lives at the moment. I wear an Apple Watch myself, and woke up this morning and Apple Watch told me to rest. So I said, thank you for your suggestion, and I'm going for a run anyway, so it's not going to tell me what to do. But it's fascinating that we're all wearing these devices. So what I'd like to do is to set the scene, first of all, give you some of the economics and the prevalence of these devices globally. I will give you some examples of some of the ways in which these devices are being used for medical insights at the forefront of technology. And then in the real data, real life section, I'll pass on to Bob Rick and Chenny, who are joining us online, and they'll give you tell you some of the results of our study. So we commissioned a study, and we had some very kind guinea pigs that provided some of their wearable data to us. And we constructed 3 hypotheses. They were all around sleep quality, exercise, alcohol intake. and we tested those hypotheses. And then we were able to build a couple of preliminary sleep models, sleep efficiency models, and that was from sort of the Apple data and the Oura Ring data. And also we had a food cluster analysis from MyFitnessPal data that we'll take you through. So those are the sorts of things we would like to share with you today. So it's a relentless and expanding market. So we're up to 94 billion US. That was in 2022. So really this market globally has doubled in the last few years. So it's, it's extraordinary. It's becoming part of our lives at the moment. And if we look at the market share around the world, you'll see, unsurprisingly, so Apple dominates currently. Apple have got 30% of the market share. And then Samsung are some way behind. And then you've got all these other players. And then you've got this sort of other category that's got lots and lots of different providers there. And in fact, Oura Ring, and that's one of the wearable data that we use in this study, that's in the other category. So there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot to choose from and a lot of competition. And what about closer to home? Well, in Australia, it was recently reported that 90% of Australians own a smartphone that is capable of tracking steps, and 36% own some kind of smart or wearable device. So that's in Australia, and that's quite a lot higher than globally. So globally, we see 60% of people smartphone ownership, and only about 2 or 3% for the smart device. So it's really as it would seem to be a nation of trackers, and so it's quite interesting to look at what data we are collecting. Why are people in Australia tracking? Well, according to a report by Deloitte a few years ago, 45% of us are tracking steps, 18% are worried about our weight, 29% are looking at heart-related data, 14% are counting calories and watching our food, and 25% of people are monitoring their sleep. And 13% are monitoring blood pressure. So there's a whole variety of reasons there why we might monitor our health. And actually that's increased from COVID. So at COVID time, before 2020 COVID, we had 28% of people were monitoring steps, etc., with a smartphone. After COVID, that had gone to 58%. So clearly, the orders to go out and exercise once, for an hour a day in lockdown were quite successful in getting us all a bit more interested in our health. So that is the setting the scene. It was interesting to look at what does our device know about us, and it's more a question of what doesn't our device know about us, right? It collects an extraordinary amount of data in terms of raw metrics. So from biometric data to location, vital metrics like blood oxygen, temperature. The sleep data is quite interesting. So a lot of apps now are monitoring your stages of sleep, your light sleep, quality sleep, deep sleep, and that's quite interesting. But each wearable presents its own challenges in terms of the interpretation and analytics of that data. So if you take Apple Watch, for example, if you export the same heart rate variability twice, so same person, same time period, but do the export twice, you'll get some different values. So you've got a usable device, but we don't quite understand the processing data of the data that's provided, before it's released to the end user. Another good example of the challenges is Oura Ring. Now, we know that the Oura Ring is actually quite accurate in measuring sleep metrics, but they present the exportable data in collated daily values, and that leaves all the intraday metrics sort of inaccessible to the user, apart from viewing it in the Oura app. So it seems that all of these different companies and wearables, they all sort of have their own secret sauce and their own proprietary data methods and their own guardrails around the raw data, and that's certainly a challenge that we encountered in the study. We're going to go to the results soon, but very quickly, what's happening at the forefront? We have an app called DiabDeep, which has a 95% accuracy in classifying type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and it uses data inputs from basic health information, smartwatches and phones, and that's pretty encouraging. And we also have a epileptic seizure predictor. In fact, Rick, who you'll hear from shortly, one of his friends has such a device, and researchers have managed to forecast epileptic seizures 30 minutes before they occur on a small sample of patients. So that's very encouraging. So a lot of potential in the medical space too. So having set the scene, we're going to focus on the study and some of the hypotheses that we looked at. And before I pass over to Rick, I just want to say a big thank you to our guinea pigs who have provided us with data. We've anonymized them, as you see. You can't tell who they are from the picture. So a big thank you to everyone who donated data. We couldn't use everyone's data in this study, and as typical with data science, we spent 80 to 90% of the time fighting with data, and that left a couple of weeks for analysis. But nevertheless, we have some stuff to share with you. And I'm going to pass on to Rick, who's actually calling in from Malaysia, and he is going to take you through some of the details of the study. So Rick, I hope you can hear us and that you're sitting comfortably and about to join us.
Hello. Hi. I hope everyone can hear me too. Thanks, Matt. Okay, I'll bring us through some of the analytics results that we at MNC Actuaries were able to get from our data scientists and analysts who are very talented. Now, just to bring up, we did have a lot of sources of data. It was very exciting from each guinea pig. Although we don't have results for every one of them at this stage, we will be presenting a few of them today. Okay, next slide, please. So now, before we get into it, next slide, please.
There you go, Rick.
Yeah, thank you. Now, before we get into it, it's important to get a bit of foundations so that you understand some of the results that we are going to be showing. And the first thing being this heart rate variability measure that we got from the data. Now, this measure measures the interbeat variability between your heartbeats. And without getting into too much detail, what you just need to know is that this HRV tends to be higher when you're relaxed and lower when you're stressed, okay? Just remember that, just for the purpose of analytics later. But it measures a lot in your autonomic nervous system and reflects a lot about your fitness and health. Next slide, please. And another thing you need to know is heart rate zones. So if you're a person training hard, running and doing lots of exercises, cardiovascular exercises, these boundaries, these hard boundaries of your heart rate measured to the maximum heart rate you have, does reflect your health and fitness. And if you're a person training to become stronger as an athlete, you do want to improve and spend time in these higher zones. This will improve your blood circulation, your speed endurance, efficiency in how you consume carbohydrates, and the ability to even withstand high levels of lactic acid in your blood for longer. So zone 5 is the highest zone. A professional athlete would only last in that zone for maybe 8 minutes before needing to run slower so that their heart doesn't explode. So that's the preliminary understandings. Let's see guinea pig A. Consulting actuary. Okay, let's give a profile so that you appreciate guinea pig A. Guinea pig A is an actuary working in life insurance, superannuation, and reinsurance consulting. He has a busy work schedule, enjoys eating food, drinking wine, and running. Guinea pig A is very consistent in wearing his Apple Watch Series 9. He uses Strava to measure his running activity and records his food with MyFitnessPal. He sometimes records his alcohol intake as well. Okay. Let's think about the data he has. Next slide. So just to give this broad overview, his heart rate data was collected in abundance, intraday level heart rates, which actually enabled us to calculate those zones I just defined earlier, which we will analyze. So we actually data engineered all of that data into some interesting form and tried to see if we could squeeze out some analytics from it. We also got some data from Strava, which is shared sleep data from AutoSleep, and nutrition data from MyFitnessPal, and that alcohol intake, which we list the quality here. A lot of them self-reported and some automated, but you just need to know we do have these data. And it's really like Christmas for health analytics. And we will see how we fare with all of this data as we try to perform analysis on it later and some modeling. Next slide, please. We see now the journey of what we've done. I put a summary here just for ease of understanding. This is read top to down, left to right. And one of the challenges was, despite us having abundance of data, we did find that a lot of data was very inconsistent in quality and availability. Out of gaps in the data, basically, and they're very sporadic and unreliable. Now, with this more reliable granular heart rate data we got from the Apple Watch, we did combine it with the Strava activity to check the heart rate behavior during some of the activities, especially running. We then calculated the 5 heart rate zones using boundaries that was predefined for this individual. After we got all of that, we tried to overlay everything we had on top of that data to see if we could see any patterns and trends and analysis results. That sleep data we overlaid, alcohol consumption. We also sort of matched against stressful periods we knew and tried to see if we could see its effects in sleep and activity. We then started doing a bit of simple modeling. We modeled training load, how many days since the last workout is this training load affecting guinea pig A, how this overlaid with sleep, with the sleep averages, and other fields that affects quality of sleep. Finally, after doing a few trend analysis, we did go into deeper modeling. We tried several models, simple linear regression, lasso, ridge, decision tree methods, SVMs. We also did an XG boost, a CAT boost, and we tried to benchmark all of these against the simple linear regression model. These models also included not just the raw exponential variables, we also tried to do some time analysis with lags, all which had challenges, which we'll show the results later. At the end of the day, we didn't do much feature engineering on this data because the data was quite sparse and difficult to begin with. So not much feature engineering was done, but we will show how that went. Let's move on. So how do we start to approach data? Well, we started by trying to test some very broad hypotheses, just to get a good view of the data. And just to note that at this stage, these tests were very qualitative and not very quantitative in nature, given the quality of data we did receive. So we built graphs and analytics, and we tried to analyze broad trends in this data. Here are the 3 hypotheses shown on the screen. We tried to look at alcohol. We expect alcohol to negatively impact sleep after you had a big drinking session. We did think your sleep is going to be affected after those big drinking sessions. So we tried to look at that. We checked cumulative exercise load in a single week. We expected that if you trained really hard that week and we measured your exercise load, you would see a change in your heart rate variability in the days corresponding or the days after, because it is known that strenuous exercise affects your heart rate variability. And finally, not just cumulative training, we tried to look at a single effect of intense exercise that we knew guinea pig A did, and we wanted to see, did it affect guinea pig A's sleep? Did it affect guinea pig A's HRV? Let us look at some of these results now. Hypothesis 1, alcohol. What's happening here? Now, to understand this graph amongst its business, just think of the blue line and the red line mainly. And the blue line is those weeks where we've got plenty of drinks, standard drinks precisely for that week, accumulated, looked at moving forward. And the right axis, y-axis, is that 30 drinks is the max. You can tell that week, that's a heavy week of drinking, and you want to see the trends. And then the red line is your sleep. You expect your sleep to be affected if you had that heavy drinking. And undergirding those bars, purple and green, are basically the splits of deep sleep and quality sleep, which we will ignore for the purposes of this. And what do we expect? We expect a dip in the red line when the blue line goes spiking up. And one of the things we found was that there wasn't very clear patterns of that happening. We actually couldn't find trends where heavy drinks suddenly decreased the average amount of sleep. This is very apparent in the first peak, where 30 drinks you can see in the blue step. That red trend, that actually went up, meaning he slept even better, not worse during that time. But in other instances, the red line did decrease. So this was inconsistent and inconclusive when we looked at it. Maybe we'll check the next hypothesis now. Next hypothesis is exercising really hard. I'm going to show you a busy graph now, and we'll try to understand this busy graph. Firstly, just to understand cumulative exercise. This was actually measured by the zone trainings. So if someone trained in the higher zones, we consider that heavier training that guinea pig A had done, and zone 1 would be lower training. And we graphed that measure that we measured on an intraday level. And looking at this graph, basically the third graph from the top is the interesting one, where that's the measure of cumulative load that has been trained on for the past 7 days averaged. The topmost graph is your sleep, how much quality and deep sleep you have. The second one is the zone trainings. This was where a lot of data engineering was done. We tried to check how much training in a particular zone was happening that day. And the final fourth graph you see from the bottom, which is a bit faded, you can't see it, but you can see a trend on the dark blue line going upwards and a bit sporadic light blue line if you squinted your eyes. This was the HRV over time. Now, because this is a cumulative training load analysis, the red line is of interest here. That is the line where the heaviest training load on the 7-day average was found. And we did expect, based on our hypotheses, affected sleep and affected HRV. That's it. In the trends we see, you do not see apparent trends from this cumulative training affecting the sleep. The sleep seems pretty good on the average on the topmost graph, or the HRV. It was actually going up. We expected it to come down on the average moving forward. So this once again led to very surprising results when we looked at this. Oof, not faring too well, it seems, Apple versus Actuary. But let's continue on and see whether a next hypothesis would show anything interesting. We then checked whether intense training could see a reduction in sleep quality and decrease in HRV. Now, to test this, we actually knew that guinea pig A was having a marathon in May and September. So we wanted to look at, okay, what's going to happen during these marathons when he pushes himself? And we're going to look at it now. So we look at it now. So what happens here is that we see here marathon on 21st of May. And we do see good and interesting results. It's very apparent where the marathon day happened. Like you can see in the zone training middle graph, really intense day of running, strenuous exercise. And the guinea pig A self-reported that could barely sleep that night from the shock from the marathon. That wasn't what the data showed, though. He seemed to sleep just fine based on the red line analysis you can see there on the topmost graph. But what we did see was there was a dip in the HRV the night after, shown by the most bottom graph. And this was, we expected to be the same night, not the night after. And so this was also surprising. And that's it. It didn't seem to match our understandings. And we tried to check the next marathon as well. Check the next slide, please. And the same results was observed. The sleep wasn't really deeply affected. And once again, the HRV had a dip the day after, not the night itself. So all of these results were very surprising and not corresponding with our basic understanding of medical study that we see as is understood. Looks like it's pretty difficult to squeeze some insights from this data. So this is the summary of the results. Just spoke about it, so I might not dwell on this. We still tried to squeeze more insights from the data. We didn't want to give up. So we started trying to do some sleep efficiency modeling. And we performed all that we performed, as I described earlier, on the data to data engineer all of these fields and try to see an analysis. It was very difficult nonetheless. Let's just jump straight to the missing data piece that was happening here. And what we noted was there was a lot of missing data, despite gathering a lot sporadically, probably because the watch was being removed at night, and probably because there was inconsistencies. Even though we knew guinea pig A was very diligent in collecting his own data, it was still very hard to get that data. And at the end of it, we barely had slightly over 200 data points post all the engineering. And we'll tell you what we did then. We then tried to model everything by combining them with the Apple health rate, Strava data, auto sleep data, alcohol intake, as mentioned before. And we performed a whole bunch of modeling. Now, as is any good modeling, we always do a bit of exploratory analysis in the beginning, which we will show you. So the next plot is a typical plot we usually do in doing some modeling, which is a Paris plot. Some of us will be very familiar with that. This plot basically tries to see correlations in the data if we are able to find anything, any pattern of behavior between variables, dependent and independent, given the data set. And in an initial premiere, we did see some patterns. I don't know if you need to squint your eyes to see, but if you looked at the number of drink, third column from the right, and the HRV, you'd see a negative correlation there, which is third from the top, basically that box in the middle. And that shows that if you got more number of drinks, your HRV would reduce. Okay, that's a broad overall trend. It's the same with some other measures where it says that your quality of sleep fourth from the top, right below that measure I just said. Number of drinks would increase your quality of sleep. Bit of a not very explainable result, given what we've just seen earlier on the graphs and trends. And everything else was not very interesting. They're very, not very correlated. Correlations around 0. But that's okay. We'll try to model this anyway, and we'll see what happens. And just to summarize again, just to remind you what we did, we fit a simple linear regression to establish a baseline. We tried building a SOL model, a rich regression model, decision trees, support vector machine model, followed by an XG boost model. Some of these models we added because we were trying to explain complexity in the data, such as the SVM model. And some of it we tried to model even further because the results were poor, and the XG boost model was known to predict things very well, and we tried to add it as well. And just to cut a long story short, which this graph is already showing, it shows the results of our model performance. Now, it's very hard to read, I know, but basically the left graph is the root mean square error graph, and the right graph is the RSQ, sum of root squares. Just using the left as a baseline, the leftmost would show the lowest root mean square, and the right sides would show higher and higher root mean square, which means the best performing model is the leftmost on that graph. And if you squinted your eyes, you'd maybe see it, but just to note, that graph over there, the best model was the last SOL regression model. And we were trying to predict sleep efficiency in this case, which was the only measure that we found good quality. The data was good quality enough to actually measure anything. And its performance was quite bad. It was a root mean square error of 6.8 on a measure that took values between 0 to 100, where most of the values were between 85 to 100. Meaning the predictability between 85 to 100 was not very reliable. This was the best we could squeeze out of this data when we tried. Just a note, cross-validation, which is a model fitting procedure, all done as well on this data set. Whew, very difficult, we noted, in trying to model this data. We tried to squeeze more insights, nonetheless. And now we move to some interesting results, which we found some good insights. Now, this is a food clustering analysis. And just to remind, the data we had on food was actually nutrition data from MyFitnessPal. And just to explain, that's macro and micronutrition of guinea pig A, because he was very diligent in gathering his food using a food dictionary. And this will show you calories, fat, poly and monosaturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, sodium, potassium, carbohydrates, fiber, sugar, protein, and a few vitamins, all available. Very interesting. And so we tried to do an analysis on this and perform some clustering. Now, if you're not familiar with what clustering is known as an unsupervised learning method. And it's a technique that we use without first understanding what the data is even about. But we do it so that we can see if there's any inherent structure or pattern in the data with no assumptions made, which we can observe. And so what then is interesting is after performing a clustering algorithm, you want to see if these patterns that were identified can be backward mapped to the raw data set to see what formed those patterns, just to inform us about these aggregated values. And this is what we did with guinea pig A's data, okay? Just to note this journey as well, we did a bunch of cleaning. Clustering requires a bit of data preparation as well. We removed some positive skewness in the data. We centralized the data. We did a technique called dimension reduction, which I won't explain here, just to help with the clustering algorithm. And after doing all of that, that's when we performed our clustering analysis. I'll show you the clustering results now in a broad overview. Here is the clustering analysis. We split it into meal times, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, which was actually defined in the data set. And if you look at these graphs, the 2D map picture of colors that are batching together reflects a cluster that the algorithm found, okay? So in breakfast, for example, we have found 3 clusters. You have no idea what those clusters are, but 3 clusters was defined to be patterned and batched together. And the other ones, you can see there are more clusters found, lunch, dinner, and snacks. Let's get to some of the analysis of these results and try to understand them. I'll show you now the backward mapping of a particular one, breakfast. Now, for guinea pig A, we tried to look at the breakfast trends. Now, we knew there are 3 clusters on breakfast, and we looked into cluster 2. So this graph can be understood as the clusters being defined on the x-axis. The calorie intake is the nutrition we were looking at in this case, and we split it by weekend. Okay. Now, for the cluster 2 in particular, we saw an above average calorie intake for breakfast. Okay, and this made us suspect that cluster 2 kind of reflects a very favorite go-to meal that guinea pig A tends to eat. It seems to be consistent with 2 eggs in the calorie intake, and some outliers that presents probably eating 3 or more eggs in this behavior. Now, the higher calorie intake on weekends suggests that guinea pig A probably eats more during the weekends as well. But it's very clear, if you can see in the graph, cluster 2 jumps out at you, something as a go-to meal. Now, we'll continue our breakfast analysis. Let's have a look. Next slide, please. Then we look at breakfast analysis for cluster 3. And we saw that in cluster 3, there is much higher fiber, vitamin C, and carbohydrate intake. And this suggests that this particular meal seems to be a cereal, fruit, or vegetable that guinea pig A tends to frequent. Once again, there seems to be a general trend of more on the weekends. So I think guinea pig A tends to take a break during the weekends. Then we look at the overall trends as well of this clustering analysis over time. Now, over time, we can see readily that calorie intake has increased for guinea pig A. And just in guinea pig A's defense, we do know that guinea pig A was training for a marathon and had to eat more and gather more food. And there was a pattern where we saw in cluster 3, there was an increased presence with the vitamin and fiber content, meaning vegetables, to have increased in 2023. So you can actually see the food behavior patterns that is coming out from guinea pig A's eating lifestyle. Now, I've got a lot more results, and I'll just give a summary of them because there's many. So I'll just give that summary now. So in general, lunch and dinner included, not just breakfast. Eating over the weekend was definitely more. Now, lunch was very interesting because we saw a higher variation in lunch and poorer clustering outcomes when we tried to do the internal validation for the clustering using certain clustering scores that are known. I don't want to read them out there, but we did have a few metrics to measure the cluster quality. And this suggests that lunch tends to be very hard to cluster and at higher variability and versatility than breakfast, which might indicate the behavior of eating a lot of variety food during lunch. We also see that lunch can sometimes be completely fiber-free, which tells us that perhaps guinea pig A doesn't like some vegetables during lunch at times. Now, one particular lunch cluster had also an extremely high calorie upper bound, which indicated quite a lot of bread, rice, or noodles occurring between April and August. This coincided with guinea pig A's training for a marathon, which we would understand for some of you who run marathons, you need to start storing sugars in your cells so that you have enough energy for the marathon. So that's pretty interesting. And finally, we did also see 2 additional ones where we had unique clusters forming for dinner just for 12 entries, which were extremely high in calorie and protein upper bounds and very low variabilities in iron and fiber, which was a very specific meal, it seems. We thought this was suspected meal plans that guinea pig A had, but we understood it eventually that it's probably from the family where they usually eat consistent food and meals for the children, since kids tend to be picky with their food. So that's an interesting result. And finally, we did see that there was an increase in the snack cluster after April 2023 of extremely sugar-rich snacks. And this cluster seems to have endured the end of the data set, which might imply an increase in snacking behavior that has synced in. Anyway, that was very interesting results that we found, and we look forward to actually seeing if we can dig more in the future. And I pass the time to Chenny, who will walk us through guinea pig B.
Hello, thank you, Rick. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about guinea pig B, who is a really healthy person, a lot of exercise in their lifestyle and eats very well. Someone who, something that I really should be doing more of. I'm sure if you did a cluster of my diet, it would probably be in the high fat concentration there. But yeah, so we're looking at guinea pig B. So apart from being really healthy, this person has been using the Aura ring, which is one of these devices that tracks your quite a lot of measures that Matt talked about earlier, and she's using the Generation 3 version of this. Matt, if I could ask you to, thank you. So one of the things, so what we want to do, so we've got her data and we wanted to look into her data to see whether we could use that data to improve some aspect of her life. And one thing that we thought, everyone would love help with is with sleep. So we looked at sleep efficiency, which is just the time that you actually spend asleep when you're in bed, because no one likes lying in bed just waiting to get to sleep. That's just annoying for everyone. So let's see if we could build a model about that and help understand it so that we can hopefully anticipate bad nights and act accordingly to hopefully improve our sleep. The other thing about sleep efficiency is the Oura ring is actually very accurate at measuring it. So I've just got there a graphic that comes from a study that I've referenced below, and that shows how the Oura ring categorizes your sleep compared to how a polysomnography study does that, which is a medical grade sleep study, and it's quite accurate at working out whether you're awake or not. May not be so good with working out whether you're in REM sleep or light sleep. It looks like there's a little bit of confusion there, but that's why we're looking at sleep efficiency. But I would just like to probably caution one thing. Whilst the Oura ring is not as accurate at measuring other things, we've used those values as predictors to work out sleep efficiency. So just keep in mind that some of these predictors may not have been measured with 100% accuracy. So just a real quick introduction to the data. So we had 1,161 data points, and the data was really diligently kept. This guinea pig B just we only missed 21 days of data in all of that time, and I think that kind of speaks a little bit about kind of some of the advantages of the Oura ring, because its charge lasts a long time, and it's also very quick to recharge. So if you do want to capture a continuous data set for yourself to analyze, then that kind of gives it a bit of an inbuilt advantage over maybe some other devices. So on the top right corner, you'll see a chart, and that has the distribution of guinea pig B's sleep efficiency. And we've been told that the sleep efficiency over 85 is good, so they've got pretty good sleep. The chart in the bottom right corner, that shows the actual sleep efficiency over that time, and you can see it's just really variable. And you can see there's these big spikes down, and that's really what we were hoping to kind of anticipate for the user, so that they can avoid those bad nights. And then you've got a chart on the bottom left. That's just the autocorrelation of sleep efficiency, and that just shows that there is significant autocorrelation. So you see those little dotted lines. That's the significance barriers. And that just means if you've had a good night's sleep, you're likely to have another good night's sleep, and vice versa. If I could go into the next slide. So let's talk about our analysis. So first, pre-processing, which you've got to do in every data science project. Data transformation, didn't really need to do much. I mean, there wasn't much need to log the data or anything like that. It was quite good that way. Data cleaning removed highly correlated variables, and also variables with very little variability. And also for numerical variables, we just scaled it and centered it, which just means we subtracted the mean divided by the standard deviation, so standardized those variables. What we did though was we did enrich the data to hopefully get some more insights. One of the things we did was we created a feature which was the day of the week, because we all have a weekly schedule, and that may have an impact on whether we're going to have a good night or not. We imported the minimum nighttime temperature from a third party, because that might have an impact. We included the phase of the moon, because anecdotally, some people turn into werewolves, and that could have an impact. And we also lagged the variables by up to 3 days, because with sleep there's a debt. Sometimes the things that have happened, if you've had a few bad nights of sleep, then that's going to build up a debt which may affect your next night. So we had a look at the lag variables. All up, there was close to 150 variables. So in terms of the actual modeling, so we broke the data into a training and test set, and within the training set, we use cross-validation to tune the parameters of our models. One thing to be aware of is this is a time series analysis. So it's a little bit different from probably most of your data science projects because the data points aren't independent. They are, they've got that temporal nature that, so you have to be very specific in the way you build up your training and test set. So test set has to be after training set, and there can't be any overlap. And also you have to be very careful with your cross-validation. So there are two kind of main techniques. One's called sliding windows and the other one's called forward chaining. And we tried them both. I can go into more detail about what we did about those if you're interested in the question section. And then what we did is, actually, man, if you could stay on that slide. And then what we did is we fitted two simple models, so a linear regression model and a decision tree model. Because they're just easy to explain. But we did try to optimize those. So with the linear regression model, we added a regularization term, which we optimized, and with decision tree model, we're optimizing many variables like max depth, minimum leaf size, and so on. And that chart, that graphic there, that shows you the results from the cross-validation. You can see the linear regression. Linear regression was the best with the regularization term. But you can also see that it didn't really explain a lot of the variability. There's only about 9% in terms of the R squared, which is the second chart, which is the one on the right, the graph on the right. It only explains about 9% of the variability. But after that, so these are our two models. So we've worked out the linear regression is the better of the two, and we've got the regularization term that optimizes that. Okay, that's good to go. But let's have a look at how good that model is. So we compared it against a cat boost model. So Matt, if you could go on the next page. And a cat boost model is a gradient boosted model. It's based on decision trees. It's quite a sophisticated model. It does quite well in Kaggle competitions. Just to give you a little bit more information, it's kind of built on a lot of like Bayesian statistics. So it starts off with like a weak, what they call weak learners, which are weak predictors, weak models. And then what it does is using the results of that weak model, it then builds another model, and then so on, and builds another model, and then builds another one, and then so on and so on, and gets better and better with time. But you can see that the linear regression model is very similar to the cat boost model. So we're just looking at testing RMSE. RMSE is the error term, and testing is really what you look at. And you can see they're very similar. And so that was really kind of reassuring. It means that we're getting basically we're getting almost all of the kind of insights that we can from the data that we've got. Now, in terms of what were the factors that were driving the model, we can see Wednesday nights were pretty bad for sleep. Also, if you had been awake quite a lot the night before, then you're likely to have poor sleep efficiency tonight. And that's kind of to be expected because we saw that autocorrelation in one of those earlier charts, and so on and so on. And there's more factors. Matt, if I could get you to go into the next page. Thank you. But one thing that I would say is the model wasn't great. And I don't say that it wasn't great because it had a low R squared, because just because it's got a low R squared doesn't mean the model's not valuable. I'd say it's not great because it hasn't really helped us for our purpose. Our purpose is to build a model so that the user can kind of anticipate these bad nights of sleep. And maybe do something to stop that happening. And so you can see here the red is the expected results on the test set, and the blue, this is in the bottom left-hand corner, sorry, and the blue is the actual results. And you can see it's just not capturing those poor nights of sleep. It's not capturing some of the factors that are driving the variability. And then if you look at the bottom right-hand corner chart, which is the errors, you can see that there's significant autocorrelation left in the error terms, which just means the data that we've got is not actually capturing all of the effects that are going on. Now, another thing is, if you could go back to the earlier slide, um, another thing about that kind of confirms this is if you look at the testing RMSE and compare it to the training RMSE, the testing RMSE is actually lower than the training RMSE, which, this kind of is more in line with what you would expect if there's underfitting. And what that means is that whilst we looked into this data to hopefully build a model that can, help the user in this metric, we weren't able to kind of establish it here. But I think with future generations of the Aura Ring, hopefully that'll change, because what we're suffering from is underfitting. And if we can get, devices that measure more variables or measure variables more accurately, then I think, and you're going to get better results from these models. So that's what I've on our own. Unfortunately, we couldn't really use that data to improve someone's life right now, but maybe not. Maybe the future is a bit more promising.
Thank you, Chenny. Thank you so much, and to Rick as well for joining us online and explaining some of the technical details there. Very technical analysis and the various data challenges that we experienced. We're almost out of time, so I'll do a quick reflections, which is that we didn't solve all the world's problems, but we started to see some hints in the data. We couldn't really necessarily draw firm conclusions. Some of the analysis we did was more qualitative rather than quantitative. But I think, with more data, with more time, with more subjects, I think we could probably get around some of the challenges. Certainly the different formats of the different wearables and brands and the different sort of guardrails they place around the data that is given to the end user, that represents a challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. And yeah, no, I think we learned a lot from the study about what you can do with collecting data and kind of splicing it together. And we are not deterred. I think Apple has probably won this round, but we're still going to continue, and we're always interested if anyone would like to be a contributor or a collaborator on the data science side. We intend to continue the battle of Actuary versus Apple to see what we can understand. So thank you all very much for listening. I've gone over a little bit, so we might just have time for a couple of questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd really like to thank Matt, Bob, Rick, and Chetty on a lot of hard work. Oh, and the guinea pig, sorry. On a lot of hard work and on such a really interesting and detailed study and presentation. There were a number of questions. I guess the most interesting really one is could it be argued that these smart devices create privacy issues as they collect people's health data? And in particular, I guess, how do you feel about the data you've got on your smart devices being used by Apple and by an insurer, maybe?
Okay, I'm happy to have a go at that. On the second question, how do I feel? I mean, I'm pretty chilled about. I don't really care if people want to use my data and use it to sell me products, or I think that's fine. But I guess everyone's different. Of course there are privacy issues as you get into if someone's got a medical condition or someone's got something personal that can be derived from the data. So I think it's a case for everyone, isn't it, to think about those terms and conditions. When you click the data, you give over your data to an app or a third-party provider. It's a very personal thing, I think.
Okay, great. And then I'll ask one final question. I guess if you have any other questions, then please reach out. I'm sure they'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Of course.
Just the final question, because of time, is what is the obstacle to measuring calorie intake, and what is the sleep monitor measuring to determine different sleep states?
Okay. Shall I start, Sheni? You're going to jump in, I think. So with the calories, I mean, I guess it's down to self-monitoring. If you're monitoring if you're logging your food into an app like MyFitnessPal or something and monitoring your diet, if you're diligent, then you can get really good information. The sleep devices, They seem to be quite different, don't they, between different... Jenny, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is you never really get access to the raw data. You only get access to things that are kind of processed, like first of all, like things about scores, and also whether you're in REM sleep and stuff like that. I don't really know. I think that's their secret sauce. Like I don't know all the measures that they're capturing, but they've clearly, they've got all these sensors and they've got all these algorithms which are using these sensors to kind of and come up with all these other things like you're in sleep, REM sleep, and light sleep, and or whatever it is. They're not really quite there yet with the accuracy. I think I showed in one of those earlier charts that they sometimes confuse light sleep and REM sleep. So that's hopefully in the future these devices do get better, and they maybe through having more sensors, or maybe it's just having a better kind of algorithm that understands what the signal is from all these sensors that they've collected.
Thanks, Jenny. And I think with Apple, or certainly with AutoSleep, there's a particular app that links with Apple Health that looks at your heart rate, and that sort of says, well, you're in this stage of sleep. I think a number of things do that. But we did do some research around the fact that I think when you look at things like heart rate variability, which is being measured during the night, Apple Watch, I think, is a bit random, whereas something like Oura Ring, I think, is supposed to be more, it's taking a more accurate measurement. The question is, can you get all of those accurate measurements at the end when it's output? And we're not sure that we've necessarily solved that yet.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'd like again to thank Matt, Bob, Rick, and Jenny. Thank you very much.
Thank you.